Um,
Okay, well, hello, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Mark Morley, and I'm the training manager for the Good Governance Academy. We're delighted to welcome you to another showcase webinar featuring an endorsed training program. Today, we're honoured to welcome Leigh Roberts and Professor Mervyn King to present an overview and key insights into their book and associated course, The Healthy Company. It's great to see so many of you online. Please let us know where you're from in the chat window below. It's always good to see which regions are being represented. While people are still joining, I'll share some quick housekeeping tips. If you can't see the control panel on your screen, please press the Alt key on your keyboard. That'll give you access to the chat box, the question box, and the reaction buttons. We'd love to see your reactions to the conversation, so please make good use of the applause buttons and the thumbs up buttons. I'll also be very happy to ask any questions you have, so please record these in the chat box, please, and I'll ask these during the question and answer session later on. For those who are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy, we're a non-profit organisation that was established by Professor Mervyn King in 2019. We collaborate with universities, business schools, professional bodies and other organisations all around the world to share information on critical business issues. We run regular webinars on current hot topics, in addition to hosting colloquia twice a year. These are high-profile events which have been attended by over 10,000 people, and the output of these is shared with over 5 million professionals throughout our support member network. We also run these showcase events to promote courses which the Academy has endorsed. The endorsement program is available to any organisation and involves an assessment against specific criteria which aligns with our own focus areas and ensures the highest standards are maintained. It's available for courses of all formats, online, in-person and hybrid. So if you have a course you'd like to put forward for endorsement, please visit our website or connect with me on LinkedIn. Anyone that registers for an endorsed course through the GGA will receive our certificate of attendance, and these certificates are CPD accredited by the GGA support members. The endorsement program itself was developed to support the Academy's alignment with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals of collaboration and quality education. And we're delighted to share with you another endorsed course today. I'm also happy to share that this webinar will be facilitated by the Good Governance Academy CEO, Carolyn Chalmers. So thank you, Carolyn. And if I may, pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and welcome to everyone. I see we've got quite a broad representation today, and a special welcome to Professor Mervyn King and to Leigh Roberts, who are the authors of The Healthy Company that we'll be talking about today. I'd first of all like to say thank you very much. Here's The Healthy Company. If you'd like to purchase a copy, it is available. The link is available on the website. I can highly recommend it myself. It's good reading. But I'd like to hand over now to Professor King and ask Professor King just to talk about, well, I guess why you wrote The Healthy Company and how this guides boards of directors in specifically the governance duties that they have.
Well, Leigh and I had written a book called Integrate, where we promoted integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. And between that first book and The Healthy Company, the corporate reporting world and the governance world had moved on, which it always does because it's dynamic, it's not static. And the SDGs were now well known around the corporate reporting world. And we thought that we needed to update what we had written in the book Integrate. And by the time we wrote into The Healthy Company, the integrated thinking, in revolutionary terms, that Bastille had been stormed internationally, because very few organizations had continued or continue today to still think in silos. They think in this integrated manner as we operate, so we should think, and the board should make business judgment calls on that integrated manner. So what we did in The Healthy Company was showing how to embed integrated thinking in the company. And the first thing is the board should make it clear that it is going to do an integrated report. Because to do that integrated report, you do need integrated thinking going right through the company. And we it's not speculation by Leigh and or myself. It happened in 70 countries where there was an adoption of integrated reporting, that the board announced they were thinking and going to report on operating on an integrated basis. And then integrated thinking flowed through the company, including in management reports during a fiscal period. So once the company has agreed to do, the board has agreed to do an integrated report, one of the things we point out, they should review their business model, because perhaps that business model was not done on an integrated thinking basis. And but to apply one's mind as to see how the company makes its money, how it makes its product, you need to look at it through the three prisms of sustainable development, namely the economy, society, and the environment. So you have a re-look at your business model, and you need to ask the question, when the board makes a business judgment call, is it a unified mind? In other words, are they all thinking the same about the key risk indicators, the key performance indicators, the purpose of the business of the company? What are the value drivers of the company? And I always give the example, and we give the example in the Healthy Company, of FedEx. When it started, it said its value was, and its driver of the business was reliability, because if we're not reliable in delivering parcels and documents, well, we're not going to have a very successful business. So the board needs to be of one mind when thinking about what are the value drivers. And so that needs an offline discussion by the board. And then the board comes back and applies that collective mind to the business judgment issue, which they've got to decide and make a decision in the long-term best interest of the health of the company, not as company boards did for over 100 years, in the best long-term interest of one stakeholder, namely the shareholder. So agenda items also changed during that period. Because of integrated thinking, a lot of boards had on their agenda the stakeholder relationships, because stakeholder relationships are absolutely critical, and the board needs to be informed of what are the needs, interests, and expectations of your stakeholders, not that you fulfill them, which is a connotation given to stakeholder capitalism. That's why I don't like the phrase. Rather, it's inclusive capitalism as opposed to exclusive, which was focusing on the shareholder. And so these stakeholders, one needs to know their needs, interests, and expectations, because when the board makes that decision in the long-term best interest of the health of the company, it could be adverse to a particular stakeholder's interests. But the next time when you make that business judgment call, it would be beneficial to that stakeholder. But you do it in the context of having knowledge of your stakeholders' needs, interests, and expectations. And then there's the question of consciousness, that we highlight the question that the company is an incapacitated artificial person that has no mind and has no conscience. I gave a talk in Australia, which was broadcast on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, on the innocent company. Because by definition, once it's an incapacitated person, it cannot do any wrong. The same as an incapacitated individual cannot be charged criminally, because they have no intent. A company cannot do any wrong by definition because it's incapacitated. And the company starts thinking and operating through its leaders, namely its directors. And directors' duties of good faith, care, skill, and diligence come from the 19th century into the 20th century, when there was nothing at that time written about the duties of directors. But the duties of guardians and stewards of incapacitated human beings was well known. And the duties were loyalty, good faith, care, skill, and diligence. And they became the duties of directors. So we also point out in the book that when you take on the role as director, you are the conscience of the company, individually and then collectively. Also, you are the guardian and the steward of the company's assets and its business affairs. And consequently, you should look after them and make decisions in the best long-term interest of the health of the company. I think we all know today that by the beginning of this century, research had shown that we'd reached ecological overshoot, which is a technical term for the fact that we, and more particularly the limited liability company, was using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. And that hasn't stopped. That continues to today. And population, meanwhile, from that conclusion, which was at the end of the 20th century, moving into the 21st century, the population has grown by another 1 billion people. And so the demand for product has increased, but the natural asset has decreased. Hence the development of AI and other technology, Gary, of which you are much more familiar than all of us, is so critical for future sustainable development. And so also the governance had become outcomes-based. Governance had become a mindless tick box exercise and grudgingly complied with. We've got a nominations committee, we've got an ethics committee, we've got an audit committee, tick, tick, tick. We're practicing good governance. Well, it did not follow. In many cases, proved that. And we at the King Committee reviewed that, and on an 18-month research basis with iconic companies and other academic bodies, we came to the conclusion that as with operating, you look at inputs to outcomes, which is the value creation model replacing the primacy of the shareholder. So the healthy company should be governed by a board which understands that they've got outcomes to achieve from a governance point of view. And those outcomes are value creation in a sustainable manner, adequate and effective controls, I call internal audit the oil that makes the engine going, and trust and confidence in the company by the community in which it operates, legitimacy of operations. And so governance had to be outcomes-based. And so from a governance point of view as well, there'd been a change. And we point that out as well in the Healthy Company. So a bit of an outline of why we wrote the book. Whether we covered all these things I've mentioned, I think we did. But I think Leigh can take over and carry on.
Thank you, Prof King. Thank you so much for that introduction to the book and to Healthy Company, and to understand that it comes from the book Integrate, which is really great. So I think this gives an update. And Leigh, maybe you can start off by telling us why the update from Integrate to the Healthy Company. And then Prof King mentioned a lot about integrated reporting. Maybe you can give us a little bit more insight in integrated reporting and where it's going to. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everybody. It's so nice that so many of you joined today. So thank you for your time. Yeah, so your question of why we updated, Carolyn, I think it was decided over a long lunch with red wine, because it's a lot of work to write a book. It's a lot of work. But we wanted, it needed updating from our first book. Things have progressed quite quickly, but we wanted this to, and a lot of the content was, it was standing information, but some tweaks were needed. The Integrate book was written in about 2013. So we had to update it, but we wanted a handbook, a concise handbook that you could keep in the drawer of your desk and just refer to. We wanted it to be an easy access, an easy read, simple book to read, and we wanted it to be concise. Because as you know, in integrated reporting, we don't believe in long documents. So we really wanted to be a concise. And, you know, every now and then Mervyn and I chat about the book and we say to ourselves, it's a really good book. It's got lots of good content in it. So, and we just say it was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to work with Mervyn. We don't often disagree with any aspects, actually. So we have the same thinking. Wanted to just briefly chat today before we get into the Q&A session, give my thoughts on integrated thinking, the rise of sustainability reporting, and how the integrated report fits in, and the need now more than ever before for an integrated story because of sustainability reporting. And Mervyn, feel free to jump in with your comments at any stage. So integrated thinking. And as we've been said, it's a concept that has developed. It was first mentioned in the 2013 framework, integrated reporting framework, and it's developed since then. It also appears in King 4 code because it was aligned with the framework. But broadly, I think it's a truism that human thinking progresses and moves along with time. And you can see that we've seen the progress in medical developments, technology, and of course there are setbacks. Of course there's setbacks when some nasty despots get into power and it takes the whole of humanity back again. But generally, there is an upwards direction. And this has similarly happened in corporate reporting and in how a company is governed and managed. So back in the dark ages, the focus was singular on one capital, financial capital, and the focus was short-term, the next quarterly results. The birth of the integrated reporting framework in 2013 saw the emergence of a new era, an era that acknowledged firstly the importance of all the resources and relationships that a company uses and impacts. You could see those as the 6 capitals, and the importance of managing and governing and leading a company not for the short term only, but for the short, medium, and long term, for the longevity and sustainability of the company itself. So what is often forgotten, I think, is that the integrated reporting framework came out from the learnings of the global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. Now, you remember in that period, we all learned how the impacts that a company has on society and the environment can have huge return impacts on a company. It can cause extensive damage and even the demise of so many of those companies during that period. Today, we have another crisis that we are all having to deal with, and that's climate change. And the naive view held by some humans that it doesn't matter what impacts you have on society and the environment. We need to move away from that, and a bit more on that, on my thoughts on that a bit later. So back to integrated thinking. Integrated thinking in essence, and the way we described in the book is, and Mervyn and I are adamant on this view because there seem to be some aberrations of views which have taken place in recent years, but the essence of integrated thinking as we see it is that companies, managers and leaders acknowledge and respect all the inputs from the 6 capitals that they use and rely on, and the consequential impacts that they have on those capitals, on society and the environment. And you could say it's just being a good corporate citizen, but that too. But actually, it's the essence is that it can affect and harm or benefit your company, have direct results on your company in the short, medium, and long term. This is what the board and managers need to consider in managing a company in this new era of integrated thinking, where the term integrated thinking is now pretty much accepted and is known. I want to talk about sustainability reporting and its recent rise. It's so interesting to see the different angles that the standard setters come from. So, and those angles are either voluntarily taken on voluntarily or forced on them. I think that the EU's, the EC's, ESRS, European Sustainability Reporting Standards, I think they've got it right. The standards recognize that the impacts a company has, they matter, they're material to the company, the society and the environment and the region, to the EU as a whole. The standards recognize that all key stakeholders warrant respect and they deserve to be fully informed with complete information, and that includes impacts. The ESRS standards are more in line with the King Code than the others, and it's a huge hats off to Mervyn and the King Committee for the enlightened thinking, which is in King 4. So, quick comment on the International Sustainability Reporting Standards from the IFRS Foundation. Now, what's important to remember is that the IFRS Foundation is, in essence, at its heart, a body that looks after the interests of investors. That is the body that releases the international financial reporting standards that are common in 140 countries around the world. So we all use them and we just take them as there. Those standards are aimed at getting information to investors for their risk and reward decisions, for their return decisions. So when you look at the ISSB standards, just like the IFRS accounting standards, remember that it's aimed at, they have a specific purpose. The ISSB standards, I think it's important that they're seen in the slide, that they're not seen as the be-all and end-all. I'm concerned that some regulators around the world are just seeing them as the be-all and end-all. They're not. Couple of observations on them. They don't call for disclosure of impacts, just the impacts that could affect the sustainability risks and ops of a company, that could affect the financial prospects of a company. So they're not looking at impacts on society and environment unless they could affect the financial prospects of a company. And that is because they are geared to investor information and geared to information that could affect the risk and return and reward information that investors need. So at the heart of it, I think that is the great weakness. And point one I want to make on that is which impacts won't affect the financial prospects of a company going forward over the short, medium, and long term. I've yet to see one. The second point there is it loses out on integrated thinking. You're looking at not the whole picture, and you're not looking at integrated thinking, and that could take some companies down the road of anti-integrated thinking because they're just dealing with that subset of information. The third point is that some investors do actually want that information. It's not the case that all investors do not care about impacts on society and environment. I think many of them still remember what the global financial crisis did to us. And final point on the ISSB standards is that they are a useful baseline, a global baseline, but you have to layer on the GRI and impacts and the ESRS information on top of it. They cannot be seen as one and done, the be-all and end-all. Carolyn.
Thanks, Leigh. That's very, very insightful. And I'd like to ask Prof King's impression of this, because it, that concept of sustainability reporting being both the impacts of, as you say, environment and society on the organization's financials, and the risks, the sustainability risks and opportunities associated with that, but also the organization's impacts on the environment and society, which people talk about circular economy, etc., will certainly come back on the organization in some form or the other in the closed circle that we live in. So asking Professor King, in terms of the duties of a director and a board of directors in this, as you say, the innocent company, in terms of the impacts that that double materiality that the European standards brings, in terms of a director's duties to an organization, is it just the financial, or do we need, in terms of a healthy company, to have a look at these broad aspects from a duty perspective?
The simple answer to you is it's not only the financial aspects. What is critical is an appreciation, and I was there personally at the turn into the 21st century. At the time, I was chairman of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight and speaking to IFAC at the United Nations. We agreed on 3 things. And those 3 things were 3 critical conclusions at the beginning of this century. The one was financial reporting is critical, but it's not sufficient to discharge the duty of accountability. Secondly, sustainability reporting was obviously becoming critical because of the degradation of planet Earth, the fact that we had a reducing natural asset demands for increasing consumption, that sustainability reporting was becoming critical, but without a financial report was patently not sufficient. To report them in 2 silos was divorced from reality. Those were the 3 conclusions we came to. Because the non-financial and the financial statements and the off-balance sheet ESG issues don't operate separately. These are integrated 24/7 operationally. And so you should think on an integrated basis, and you should report on an integrated basis. So we have to realize, directors have to realize in discharge of their duty of care to the company, that sustainability, like a coin, actually has 2 sides. It has the side of how the company produces its product, and in doing so impacts on those 3 critical pillars for sustainable development. But at the same time, those 3 critical pillars for sustainable development are impacting on the company. So from a social point of view, I think the pandemic was the greatest example of social impact on companies around the world. The collapse of Lehman Brothers economically had a huge impact on companies around the world, their balance sheet, their operating performance, etc. And from an environmental point of view, we know that companies operated on a basis that as long as their bottom line increased, even though it was being subsidized by society and the environment throughout the 20th century, the company was successful. It increased profit, increased dividends, increased share price. Well, no matter how you got there, it couldn't be. So today, the board has to apply its mind to not only how much money has the company made, but how has it made that money? How has it made its product? And what are the impacts inside out and outside in? To deal with this, the ISSB has developed the principle of interoperability. Interoperability accepts, in my view, that their standards do not cover both outside in, but inside out is something the GRI, other people deal with. If the 4 of us as directors think something is so material that it could actually change a risk-reward decision that a user is making of the report, well, then we use a GRI standard, says the ISSB effectively. So we have at the moment the EFRAG, the EU working group, the GRI and the ISSB talking about what the ISSB has labeled as global baseline standards, to see if they can get some commonality between the three of them, on sustainability reporting issues. And I think if they can, that would be a huge advance. At the same time, the IAASB is developing standards to do a reasonable assurance on sustainability reports. So all this, I think, is happening over the next 2 years. And if you add to that the doctrinal equivalence, Gary, which Veronica and I have raised, Veronica Poole, Leigh certainly would know that well as Mark. I don't know your background, but Leigh is a chartered accountant of many years standing. I don't think you're old, Leigh, by any means. But she was one of the senior executives at SICA for many years, South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, and drove integrated thinking and reporting there, and then broke away to consult, etc. on it, and is the chief executive now of the IRC South Africa. We have to, as the 4 directors, if there is something material, and I'm going to give it a general definition because there's so many we can talk about. We've done some interesting FAQs now at the IRC. If there is something so material that the probability is overwhelming that it could affect the thinking of a user. Now, the user is not only those who, quote, usually study the financial statements. Not. And the user could be a person who's a supplier of some organic product, for example, something, I don't know. But the user is not only, in my view, the investor. And to describe the investor really as the shareholder is absolutely skewed. Because the only time the shareholder actually puts money into the company is at subscription. When there's an IPO, he or she subscribes for those shares, puts the money into the company. After that, the shares are then sold to Mr. X. Mr. X becomes the owner of the non-incorporeal rights as a shareholder. He or she gets the dividends, etc. And he sells the shares to Mark. Who does Mark pay? Mark pays Mr. X. Mr. X puts that money in his pocket. He doesn't put that money into the company. From the secondary market onward, they are not investors, shareholders. If there's a rights issue, well, then if they take up their rights, they're once again an investor. But to have this sort of almost tunnel vision about the investor, well, the investor, if you look at the framework, the IR framework, we give the investor a very wide definition. We say it's supplier of credit, it's bank loans, it's this, that. These are all providers of capital. And so I think the ISSB, the good thing about the ISSB is the principle of interoperability, because it does give some flexibility that you can add the impacts that Leigh has been talking about, once we think it's material as a board to discharge our duty of accountability.
Thank you. So a healthy company considers this, yes, the ISSB standards as a baseline, but it shouldn't be the only consideration. Certainly considering impacts as well. To, as you said, it's good but not sufficient. The one report and the other report. And maybe to Leigh, we've got these 2 reports that, you know, there's a sustainability report and there's the financial statements, and certainly under the IFRS, which stands for International Financial Reporting Standards, you've got now the integrated reporting framework under that umbrella, where you have the IASB, International Accounting Standards Board, and then you have the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. and now you have the integrated reporting as well. But we saw a point in time that the IASB was issuing a management commentary that included some aspects of this integration, whereas up until now, we've only had the integration happening at that board level. So what is your sense in terms of the future of the management commentary bringing integration versus the integrated report at a board governing body level commentary?
Well, it's quite a complicated argument or discussion. I think that the management commentary was a practice note brought out by the IASB. The original one came out about 10 years ago, I think, and then they updated it a few years back with an exposure draft on the management commentary practice statement. That they called for public consultations on that. Nothing has happened since then. And I think, remember, that came out before the ISSB standards. So the exposure draft came out before the ISSB standards. So it's already out of date. So now the IFRS Foundation own these two documents, frameworks. So the IASB owns the management commentary, practice statement, exposure draft, and the IFRS Foundation as a whole now owns the integrated reporting framework. You recall there were a couple of mergers that the IIRC and SASB joined forces into the VRF, and the VRF fell into the IFRS Foundation. They are dealing with these two statements. I think that things will play out over the next 2 years, and when they start the integration in reporting project. Now, the agenda consultation by the ISSB last year, they gave 4 different projects, and they said to the market, well, which ones of these would you like us to focus on for our technical agenda for the next 2 years? They have now decided. So last month they came out and said that they will be doing biodiversity and human capital, and that the integration in reporting project where those 2 documents would come in is likely, well, not paraphrasing, but reading between the lines, is likely to happen. But I think definitely not in the next 2-year period, because they'll be focusing on biodiversity, coming up the standard there, and human capital. So we kind of like in abeyance with these 2 documents, but most importantly, and what was so encouraging for the integrated reporting community was that both boards reiterated their support and for the continued adoption of the integrated reporting framework for high quality reporting. So that was just a wonderful nod to say, carry on as you are. So we all are. And I think it's important for the IR community in the next 2 years, in this 2-year period, to really show how the ISSB standards, as well as other sustainability reporting standards, can fit within the overall corporate reporting suite of a company. And the IRC of South Africa, Integrated Reporting of South Africa, we've done that in our information paper, which came out last year, a global comprehensive corporate reporting system that is available on our website. But we've shown how everything can fit together. And in our first book, Mervyn and I came up with this analogy of an octopus, where the integrated report is the head of the octopus, and all the detailed stuff, all the detailed information. And you know that there's a lot: tax transparency, reserves and resources, mineral report, detailed governance report. There's a lot of information that a big company would have to put out. All of those is the arms. So your integrated report is the only report. It's the only report that gives you a complete picture, including impacts. And we think that still stands, and that structure still stands. And it's in our information paper that came out from the IRC last year. Both of our 2 optional approaches to corporate reporting suite are based on the integrated report as the only integrated information report available. And I think going forward, I strongly believe, and I know Mervyn does as well, that the integrated report has a huge place with the going forward with the amount of detail of sustainability reporting from ISSB standards, GRI standards, ESRS, TNFD. I mean, there's a lot going on. So all we need is a short little concise read giving you a complete overall picture. The integrated report in the IR framework is well placed to do that. It's a work of wisdom and it still stands.
Absolutely.
Can I
Yes.
just add to what Leigh said? At the management commentary exposure draft took a lot out of the content elements of the IR framework and put it into management commentary, and then said management's audience is the investor, the provider of capital. Well, that's a foreign concept, that a manager that has a contractual obligation to the company is now reporting directly to a stakeholder, the absolute foreign concept. And the financial statements following the IASB standards and the sustainability report following the IASB with interoperability, both are approved by the board. Now, the board is the most informed body of persons to know what and how the financial statement, the financials are impacting on the non-financials and vice versa, which they do on a constant basis daily. And in an integrated report, that's covered by the questions asked in the content elements. And you get this helicopter view of what's happening in clear, concise, and understandable language, not in the jargon we have developed in financial reporting and in sustainability reporting. Clear, concise, and understandable language. And so many international institutional managers have said to me that they read the integrated report first, and from that, they can see the quality of the board and the quality of management, because of the thinking comes through. And the other thing is that you'll have an integrated report which is approved by the board. So from a global comprehensive corporate reporting framework, the IFRS now has in its toolkit all the aspects to create this global comprehensive corporate reporting framework. You've got the IFRS standards, which are accepted in 150 countries, plus minus. You're going to have the ISSB, I think, being followed in most of those countries. And with interoperability, I think you've got a lot of flexibility, but both approved by the board, and then an integrated report, which is approved by the board. Add to that in South Africa, not even 1% of companies, when we follow the IASB standards here, do the management commentary as it exists. In Australia, it's not even 6%. So you can go through every country that follows the IASB standards. They're not doing a management commentary. So they would make that voluntary. Instead of having an integrated report which covers all the aspects which they try to put into a management commentary, you're going to have an integrated report approved by the board. So now you have an ecosystem of reporting, 3 lots which are approved by the board, and the one which brings the 2 together. And I think the IFRS really has the toolkit to create this global comprehensive corporate reporting system, as long as they don't mess it up.
Good. As they have all the tools, they need to get it right now. I've got a question here from Karen. It says, different departments within a company may have a silo approach when addressing sustainability, the actual departments. So this is kind of the integrated nature. So she's asking, how can organizations successfully implement a cultural shift of collaboration and transparent integrated thinking reporting, even with limited resources? How can they go about doing that, Leigh? You've dealt with companies over and over on their integrated reports and helping them improve their integrated reports. You sit on as a judge on many integrated reports in the IRC, the Integrated Reporting Committee of South Africa. That's one of the functions of being a member, a corporate member of the IRCSA, is that they can get access to your technical guidance and the technical guidance of the team there. So how can they go about doing this with limited resources? Is it possible?
Absolutely. What's been interesting about the progression of South African companies, and we've now been doing integrated reporting for over 10 years, is that the companies are saying that by following the IR framework, by preparing their integrated report in terms of the IR framework and answering those questions set out in the content elements of the framework, that has helped them to embed integrated thinking. And it really does help, because the content elements of the framework cover all the business areas. Now, we did an information paper about 2 years ago on aligning your external integrated report with your internal integrated information. So the person asking questions can take a look at that for some practical guidance. But that is the beauty of the integrated reporting framework, that it helps you to embed integrated thinking. So following the framework to the letter, those 18 requirements is number one. And secondly, as Mervyn said, it's board. So hopefully you can come down from your board that we are preparing an integrated report and we follow integrated thinking. And then, as Mervyn says, it'll trickle down through the rest of the company. And then having an interdisciplinary IR committee really helps. So where you take key people from the various divisions, whether it's risk, audit, internal audit, stakeholders, and the chief divisions, and you have them on this IR committee, and they are responsible for bringing all the information on the integrated report. And I think that would be another practical way of helping to embed integrated thinking in the company.
Thank you, Leigh. I'd just like to say and just raise the book again. It really is a handbook. I know we've got one question here about the practicalities of actually seeing, especially for us older people on boards, actually seeing the prints, the writing here. So in an electronic version, it's easier because we can just like do this. But other than that, for the older people, it is quite difficult to read. So I know that it's just to give an answer to the question. I know that there is the print run for the first edition has been done, but it's certainly something, Leigh, we will take up with the publishers in terms of the second print.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'd like to be listening to our stakeholders' needs, and we can read that back to Juta, who published the book, and so we hope we can oblige.
Thanks, Leigh. One of the very interesting examples of using the Healthy Company was we had a large multi-listed entity come to the Good Governance Academy and asked us about how to leverage this book to get all of their directors and executives on the same page, because this book really does, in terms of a handbook, gives the mechanism in terms of the standardization of all of the directors and the executives, and especially in boards where there is a high churn because it's so non-profit boards and membership-based boards, etc. So this does give a director's handbook, so to speak, and a leadership team's handbook. And we had an example where the board and the executives all had purchased a copy, well, the company purchased it for them. And then we went through a series of training to really bring the book to life in their specific circumstances and for their specific instances and industry. So I would really recommend, and it went down really well, that organizations do think about doing that. And of course, we can do some special interventions with the company through the Good Governance Academy. As Mark was saying, through the Training Academy, we issue certificates of attendance, which can be used for CPD purposes or continual professional development purposes. So if you are a designated director or a chartered accountant, or even with a SAPA, SABA, etc., any of the accounting bodies, please contact us about an internal intervention to bring all of your directors and the leadership team onto the same page. And then build it into your induction program so that you have this continual update. We heard from Prof King and Leigh that this book is not out of date, even though it was printed prior to the issuing of the sustainability standards, and certainly after the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI standards. And it does bring the basic principles of that every healthy company should subscribe to in terms of its leadership and its board of directors. So I'd like to recommend that please get in contact with us. Mark has put his LinkedIn profile. You can message me on LinkedIn, and we can certainly bring this book to life for your company too, bringing Leigh on board to help us do that. So thank you very much for that. We do have another question in terms of the moral sense of directors, and this is specifically directed to directors in South Africa, but we do see it in directors' governance failures around the world. And Prof King, from your perspective, I guess as a judge, and looking at the letter of the law, but also looking at morality, how do those work together, the moral compass versus the legal liability of directors in an organization? And do you think that the moral compass is not working anymore?
Well, the moral compass is a lack of understanding by the person appointed a director, because he or she has to understand that being a director, you're a guardian or a trustee of that incapacitated person's assets and its business affairs. And if you'd ask that person a question, if you were a guardian of a 3-year-old incapacitated child, what would you do? I mean, they wouldn't think of being disloyal, I think, but it's quite extraordinary. To a company, they go rogue, for example. So they completely break that idea of being a guardian and a trustee, a steward, a good steward. And that's what a director has to be. He or she's got to clear their minds and come to the decision-making table on the understanding that I understand the issue. When I chaired companies, I always used to ask, do you understand what this is all about? Because it's critical that you understand, otherwise you're actually not contributing as a director. And then you've got to think of, is this in the best long-term interest of the health of the company? And then you can hear many reasons why I wanted to call the health of the company. Leigh agreed, the healthy company was a good title for the book. And it is the long-term health of the company, because if you get that right, it's in the long-term best interest of all the stakeholders. What do we see today? At the turn of this into this, certainly the end of the 20th century, we had companies at the London Stock Exchange going for about 25 to 30 years. Today, it's between 3 to 6 years. And companies just don't survive long term. There's no sustainability. And it's because of a focus, it's like a disease. You look at one stakeholder, and unfortunately, there's still some people to this day. There's a movement certainly in the US to say this worrying about off-balance sheet ESG issues, nonsense. We've got to think just of profit. As long as it's not deceitful, as long as you're not acting illegally, fine. Even though you're having an adverse impact on society and the environment, it's fine. Well, I'm afraid you're not going to, then that person's great-grandchildren are not going to have an existence, because we won't have a planet. As simple as that. And the other understanding is, and when I lecture this, especially to PhD or senior students, I asked them the question, how did this concept of this company come about, this artificial person? And it came about because wealthy families didn't want to be owners of businesses anymore, because when they failed, they were still liable to the creditors and the employees, etc., etc. And it was intellectual thinkers of that day, Lord Gladstone, etc., said, why don't we create an artificial person? And it will have limited liability. You put the capital in at the beginning, and you've got no further liability. So as a shareholder, you've got no duty or responsibility to the company. But the concomitant is when the business fails, creditors get paid first, then the employees, and then the shareholders come last. That's the concomitant for it. And if you get that understanding, you realize that the incapacitated limited liability company was created by society, the UK government being the representative of society, by society for society. It wasn't created only for shareholders to increase their wealth. And that the principle was, well, the wealth would trickle down to the bottom. Well, the trickle became treacle. Because when the wealth was at the top, they didn't start another business. They never created more jobs. They bought another yacht or built another villa in the south of France or whatever it was. That's what happened. So you've got an instrument, and I always say to people, who is the most important person in Croatia? Who is the most important person in South Africa? It's the limited liability company. Think about it. What do we, through that company, we raise capital, we create jobs, we put food on people's tables. The limited liability company. Great intellectual thinking of the 19th century.
Amazing. We just have to make it a healthy company so that we can have a healthy society. So thank you very much, Leigh. I've got one more question for you, and that's in terms of the healthy company and what Prof King was saying, if it's created by society for society, is the integrated report essentially the company's a window into the company for society to see what's happening in the company? Or is it, in your opinion, just for the providers of capital? How do you see that played out going forward? Have we lost Leigh?
Well,
I think we've lost Leigh.
Yes,
please answer.
The answer is that if you take, let's take South Africa, Old Mutual, Sanlam, great institutions, none of the money they use to invest in companies is their money. It's the company's money. It's my money, which I've deposited with Sanlam, let's say. So people walking the streets of Cape Town and Johannesburg are the true providers of capital. It's the man in the street. And you should be reporting in a manner which is understandable to the man in the street. And an integrated report, and that's why we use the language clear, concise, and understandable. I always say, and you know, you can, I could go and lecture to students and talk in jargon and everything to them, and they don't, you've got to have a skill to simplify and make it concise and understandable. So you use the words clear, concise, and understandable in an integrated report. And that's what we try and make it clear, concise, and understandable. So that the true provider of capital, which, as I say, really is the man in the street, can understand it.
Mm-hmm. And simplicity is certainly complexity thought through to an nth degree. And last question, Leigh, I know we only have a minute, but would the complexity of adding in sustainability reporting now make a longer integrated report? Is it going to make a longer report, or are we going to see the simplicity coming through?
No, I think that is going to cause people to apply their minds even further. The sustainability standards can bring in more quantitative information, whereas some of their impacts may have been qualitative. The overall rule when preparing and presenting your integrated report is to follow the IR framework, follow the 18 requirements of the framework to determine what content goes into that integrated report to answer all of those content elements. That is the overall guiding principle. Doesn't matter what's coming in the material, different material divisions, definitions of the underlying, it's following the framework is how you prepare your integrated report. It should be should be more simple.
Great.
For preparers, as long as you have that golden rule.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Leigh. Mark, thank you for giving us this opportunity today. Are there any last things you'd like to say to wrap up?
Well, just thank you for joining everyone online. Thank you to Professor King. Thank you to Leigh. We really appreciate you taking us through that today. We hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. It will be recorded and available on YouTube. So for anyone that did miss it, we'll be able to share recordings of that. And we hope everyone joins again next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
joining. Bye.